Hello, everyone. We're back on my balcony. So we are going to just wait until 5 past, just so everyone who wants to join can join. I'll do a little reintroduction to the episodes and reintroduction to my balcony. I'll walk you through the beautiful new. It has a roof now. Very exciting installation over the summer holidays. Winter holidays. Today I'm drinking a peppermint soy milk hot chocolate. So if you want the recipe, hit me up for that. So we'll just wait till 5 past. My hair's getting a bit long. I'm gonna give it the chop. I think potentially even tonight. After club night, once again on Zoom. Doomed by the board game night that we attempted to run for the second semester in a row. Only for it to be cancelled by, not nationwide, but citywide lockdown this time. It is a very good hot chocolate. Would people be interested in a University of Auckland EBSOC ASMR channel? That idea would probably be vetoed pretty quickly. ASMR helps me sleep. I like it. Okay, cool. 2 more minutes, and then we will be beginning. So I brought a new plant out. This is the first time that this particular fern has been used in a Thursday development seminar. It's quite a pathetic plant. Like, you don't water it for a day and it goes all droopy. And I forgot to water it yesterday, and this tendril has decided to droop enormously. But other than that, it is a good plant, even if it is a droopy one. Much like development potential, we just need to nurture it and it'll grow. I believe this mug is Grace's. I have thefted it. So unusually, instead of Joe sitting in that seat, it's Grace. And I can just see her through the glass doors. She stared at me dramatically, speaking quietly so she couldn't hear, but she in fact could hear. If she wants to, she can come out and say hello. I'll swivel it. Amazing. 5 past. We can begin. So welcome to the Thursday development seminars. The first semester, and if you're joining us from the Northern Hemisphere, first semester was last semester, because we start with the calendar year. All of our seminars, because I was in lockdown, were basically, well, all except 2, were conducted on this balcony. And then we had a brief moment when we could have in-person development seminars. And those were really fun because lots of people turned up and lots of people were able to ask questions. So it had a nice organic feel. So please, would love to answer your questions as well as just letting you listen to me talk for 45 minutes. And so this semester, we managed to get through 2 seminars, and both are on BP. So one was on the introduction to British parliamentary debating, and the other was particularly on extensions, because extensions are things that are the weirdest part of British parliamentary debating, and I wanted to do them before doing opening, because I think what makes opening different from a normal 3v3 setup, because obviously you still do the setting up of the debate, you still bring the most intuitive arguments, is you're always have in the back of your mind that extensions are going to be coming after you. And I think that changes the strategy behind how you approach openings in British parliamentary debating, and how you are able to maximize the likelihood that you will get a first or a second within debate. So just a general quick overview of what we covered in the earlier sessions. So first thing we did, introduction to BP. We went through all of the different speaker positions and looked at the different things they were going to be adding to the debate. And we learned about the concept of contributions to debates. Your ranking is demonstrated by your ability to contribute to the debate. And then in the second seminar, which we looked at extensions, we looked at how contributions operate when you're an extension speaker. So they could either just be a substantive contribution, a new point that you bring, a responsive contribution, which is a way that you respond to an earlier case that adds impetus to your side by decreasing the persuasiveness of the other team's arguments, and then some general chat about the uses of framing and how you should be looking very explicitly to situate yourself within the debate and then compare yourself against the other teams, explain why what you're adding is the wonderful ingredient to the debate and how that'll help you get ahead within those debates. I often think of British parliamentary debating, unlike the very detailed clash of 3v3 debating, as being a lot about balance. It's balance between different elements that you are adding to the debate. There's the distinction between us and 3v3 in terms of making sure that you're balancing between your explosiveness in the debate, or the flair you're adding to the debate, the new contribution, and also the diligence you are bringing, just as you would in a 3v3 debate. You have the balance between the different positions that you are operating within, and making sure that you are engaging with each of those different other teams to make sure that you are maximizing your potential to get ahead. There's the balance between wanting to go for everything and making sure you're holding back and being strategic. So a lot of British parliamentary debating is about balance. And last week when we talked about extensions, we learned about the balance between making sure that you are not knifing your opening team, you're not contradicting them, so you're running things that are consistent with their arguments, but yet have to be original, so can't be a derivative contribution, and how navigating that difference is a little bit difficult. So the way I'm going to structure this broader discussion of opening half debating is once again through the theme of balance and how you are able to introduce balance to your approach. Because unlike 3v3, you can't just go hell for leather trying to prove everything, or trying to just prove one thing and then carrying it through the debate and being really disciplined, because you have to find ways to continue to exist within the debate beyond the end of your speech. And remember, if you're opening government, after 3 speeches, like 2/3 of which are yours, that's the end of your substantive contribution to the debate, and the only thing that you will be able to do is ask points of information to try and bring your case back into relevance. So first thing we're going to chat about is the 2 general techniques to approaching an opening half. One of them is the, I'm going to call it the traditional technique, where you just attempt to run a good argument, the best argument for your side, prove it well, and hope that is sufficient to carry you through to the end of the debate. And then we'll talk about crowding techniques, which essentially try and spread your case as much as possible in terms to make sure that your back half doesn't have anything that they can play with, and you are able to prove a substantial amount within the debate that when the adjudicators obviously weighing up which team has made the most contribution, getting them to go towards you. So let's have a chat about those different techniques of going through the different techniques that you can use as an opening half speaker. So the first technique, which is often called the traditional technique, is you essentially choose one argument and you attempt to explain it as the most important, just as you would in a 3v3 debate, and then explain why it is more relevant than the other speakers. There's not a huge amount you can add to this technique, except to say that there is an additional necessity to do weighting in a very explicit way, so as to make sure your point can carry on throughout the debate without falling out of the debate. And what I mean by this is that you have to be prepared for the moment that your point doesn't get any engagement from the oppositions, and hope it is still able to carry through. Or if there's engagement from the opposition, knowing that you don't have the chance to rebut those points, you don't have the chance to rebuild up your material, how do you make sure that your point is sustainable? And the way that I like to do this, and it's especially relevant for the Prime Minister's speaker, though of course is also relevant for their second speaker, making sure that they are going through and rebuilding that material and trying to make that material sustainable within the debate, is you have to think about proving the point to a high degree of sufficiency. So making sure that you go through each of the mechanistic steps to make sure that it established, then weight it very strongly. So explaining why it should be the most important contribution in the debate. You need to always be thinking through, why is this the most important thing? Is it highly certain? Is it something that is likely to affect a large number of people? Is it likely to have a particular severe effect? And we have a whole episode on how you can do weighting. So I'd encourage you to go back. I think it's like episode 8 or something. So go back and have a look at that as to how you can add impetus to your points and making sure that they're able to stick within the debate. And then, of course, as a second speaker, dealing with the stuff, really using the opportunity as a deputy to explain why, faced with the responses from the opposition, your point has particular longevity or robustness, something that'll be able to stand it throughout the debate. And I have a few tricks that I like to do to try and make sure that my points have that type of sustainability within the debates. The first is to explain things through a broader contextual framing. So not just claiming this is the most important debate point within the debate because it achieves these particular outcomes, but trying to situate it very strongly within a narrative. So say, for example, the debate is about South Asia, and you're bringing a point about how China has an impact on the way that this particular debate should operate, this debate should clash. If you situate really strongly from the beginning, this is a debate that is dominated by the rise of China in Southeast Asia, and that necessarily clouds every action that flies through, every impact that flows through the debate. You're able not just to establish like your baseline points that you want to establish in the debate, but you establish them in a far-reaching way, in a way that'll hopefully echo down the debate. And so pay a lot of attention to those characterization or contextual points, those narrative points, because that's something that if, say, for example, they bring out a case that you didn't expect at like closing opposition to your closing government, you can use the material that you have brought out earlier and compare and contrast it, say, for example, in a POI, such that it brings it back to life or makes it new again. So if you're the prime minister, if you're at the opening position, or either opening opposition or opening government, really do your best to set up a narrative within the debate that can then have effects on points that you haven't really thought about, or has a whole range of flow-on effects. And this can look, the most common things this looks like is doing a lot of analysis as to what the incentives on actors are, or doing a lot of analysis on what the overall context look like, because it's not about just proving particular outcomes, it's about contributing a set of ideas to the debate that'll hopefully be able to echo down those, echo across that debate. So first basic tip, make sure that you're establishing narrative or contextual points, or doing work that may not necessarily feel a huge amount like you're just proving the particular points, but will have wide applicability in the debate, or will be able to be reflected no matter what the points that the opposition tries to bring into the debate. The second is to make sure that you really clearly identify with just taglines the different elements of the analysis that you're bringing. So for example, what I'm doing here is I'm analyzing the incentives, and there's 3 incentives, I want to prove these 2 outcomes, this and this, because when you have that really strong and strict signposting within your speeches, when you make it very clear to the adjudicator what you're adding, as opposed to just generally chatting about the motion, it becomes much easier, especially in points of information on the adjudicator's mind, for you to tag back to that information. And an example that I can give of this is, if, say, for example, you are an opening team that's done a very good job signposting your points and explaining exactly what those points are or how those points operate, it means that the derivativeness or the knifing that comes from your closing team is way more able to be picked up by the adjudicator, because the adjudicator can see, actually, if there's really clear signposting. I remember my opening team had a point about this particular thing, and then it was walked through very clearly for me. That means it's very easy for me to spot when the closing team is just trying to phrase it in a slightly different language, because I have that image in my mind very clearly of what the opening team is. So you need that instinct towards clarity to be very strong as an opening team, because messiness is something that can be exploited from the opposition. And you do have to balance these 2 tips, the making sure you have a very strong narrative flow, you're doing things that can exist in the debate beyond just the points that you're bringing, while also being very clear, making sure that you're explaining things in a very specific way, making sure all of your point headings are like clear to what you are actually contributing to the debate. Because when you add more narrative to debate, it becomes easy to lose sight of the strategic work that you are doing in terms of trying to stick things within the debate. So what you should take from that is you should be bringing points that are useful characterization or useful narrative, stuff that can echo around the debate, which allows you to bring it back. But you should be channeling and packaging that information into very bite-sized, discrete parts of analysis that can be clearly identified as your material within this debate. So as the debate progresses, as the debate becomes messier, it's still clear to the adjudicator what you have contributed as opposed to other teams going forward. So this is where the second technique potentially becomes relevant if you wish to adopt it. So obviously your first speaker has stood up, they've given strong material in the debate, they've made sure that it has broad applicability, it's not just trying to prove a couple of things that can be circumvented by the opposition or just kind of ignored or framed out of the debate. You've tried to have a broader contribution. The second technique really comes in with the second speaker because you're faced once again with another balancing act. And the balancing act is that the more things you cover within the debate, the more likely you are for either that material to stick with the adjudicator or for you to cover things that will later become important. So it makes it more difficult to outflank you, and it makes it more difficult for your later speakers within the debate to try and bring extension material because you've already claimed as much material on the ground. But, and this is where I would encourage you to go back and look at the extension chat that we did earlier. This is where it's very important to make sure that you're still proving things to sufficiency within the debate. Because when you're taking a wide strategy, when you're trying to bring as much material into the debate as you possibly can, it's very easy to miss steps in your analysis or to, and to explain things poorly and to allow your later teams to swoop in on the impacts you want to claim in the material, explain how you haven't done a good enough job on explaining it, and adding the things that are necessary to do the debate. So often, for example, when I'm sitting there in my extension position and I'm crossing things off the sheet of paper of all the ideas I've written for my extension, I'm not just crossing it off when they mention that point. You want to make sure that you get to the exact limit of how much your opening team has proved. Then you're the team that is able to come through and complete that analysis, finish that analysis, and claim the impacts that they wanted to prove at that closing team. So you need to have that strategic mindset when you are debating. I want to go as wide as possible without making sure I'm sacrificing actually proving material and being disciplined. And so I actually think the best BP debaters, well, so there's a couple of versions of like the best BP debaters. So a couple of years ago, there was a very famous team at Worlds who broke first. And essentially what they do is they'd give two prime ministers speeches. They'd have one speech stand up, put a huge amount of material that's well explained, excellently analyzed, knowing that'll probably stand within the debate without needing to do a huge amount. And then the second speaker would get up and do exactly the same thing. They'd be like, here's the second half of our case. And then if you are the extension team behind them, you will have panic in your mind. You'll be hurriedly crossing through things on your page at that second speech, which gives you very little time to adjust or to go in a particular direction. And that's a great feeling if you're able to do it effectively as an opening team. But it opens those risks that you're not proving things or that you're not defending things appropriately from attacks from the opposition. So I think that this technique has fallen a little bit out of favor. And instead what you want to do is you want to find the correct balance for the debate. And you want to be able to bring in new material at second as you have the ability to do so. So the way that me and my Worlds partner, or most of my partners, because I normally speak second in BP in the opening half, I often speak member at closing, so that's called insides, which is the second and the third speakers on a particular bench, as opposed to outside, which is first and fourth. So I normally speak insides. What we would do at opening is we'd bring out a lot of contextual material at opening, make sure that we have that idea in our mind that we want our material to last just beyond the couple of things we're able to prove. And so often that will be highly contextual. So Zach would bring out a lot of context, explanation, and analysis of how actors work, the incentives that operate on them, really clearly walk through, give a narrative image of what we want to see within this debate. It would be responded to by the opposition, so we would identify the gaps, and then I would essentially bring mini extensions within my speech where appropriate. So your first instinct needs to be to protect your case, because if you just allow your case to fold at opening, you're kind of just trying to do an opening half with one speaker, and that's a way less effective than having two speakers. So you want to make sure you're defending the stuff that has come out from your first speaker. So my first job would just be like, why does the case that we brought win this debate? and going through, defending everything, explaining why, and often you'll get the impetus of the direction of the attacks that are going to be. So say, for example, you're having a debate about presidential candidates, and they bring up a series of attacks on the model that you want to bring, or the case that you've gone to broad, all focused around what they think the ideal elector is, or who they think is going to be the one that is voting in this electorate. Say it's a debate about picking Kamala Harris as the vice president, and they say specifically, we think she's not progressive enough. So what you're going to want to do there is figure out not just how far their case, the responses went, but what is the overall impetus of the attack? What is the general characterization? And then do a similar job to the prime minister of trying to analyze that particular aspect of the debate, going far beyond just the attacks that were given, because you need to have it last beyond just your speech. You need to last a whole bunch of unresponded to attacks that will come from their closing speakers. So making sure you're mindful of the broader direction of their attacks, even if it's poorly executed at the opening speaker. So you defend your case, you make sure you do the discrete steps of explaining why you think it's the most important thing within the debate, and then hopefully you'll have time left over in your speech. And what you should do with that time is really just, so the way what Zach used to call it my slash and burn technique. I don't think it's quite that dramatic, but what you want to do is try and then bolster your case, because it'll put pressure on your closing team, who will have like the easy low-hanging fruit that is left behind be taken away. It'll put a lot of pressure on the other speaker in opening opposition to make sure that they are responding to the new material, or otherwise you can do a very easy comparison in the judge's mind because you've got a lot of material that's not responded to there. And it makes sure that you have material that can potentially engage with your closing team, especially if the opening clash has been quite predictable. Or on very set ideas, which will often happen in a BP debate, because the most important clash within the debate will be one particular thing, and both opening teams will be trying to find that particular thing and be trying to run away with it. And this needs to be executed with a lot of caution in the back of your mind, because once again, you don't want to be bringing half-baked ideas that give ideas to your closing team that they can steal or they can use without it being derivative. So you need to make sure you're going through all of that analysis. But if you are able to successfully do it, it bolsters out your case. It makes it much more difficult to respond to. So those are the two broad techniques that are used at opening half. One is making sure you're proving that central contribution to the case, and you're going to prove something that echoes throughout the debate. And then second, as a second speaker, needing to do things that still add contribution to your case, make yourself more of a handful for the opposition to deal with. Make sure you're bolstering the bits of your case that need to be bolstered, but also going for a wider approach to make sure that stuff still sticks within the debate. And always, as an opening team, being mindful of what you think the closing teams are going to do. Trying to mine whenever an closing team offers a point of information, you need to be listening intently to that, because that gives you clues about how the rest of the debate is going to be playing out. And if you are more in tune with how the rest of the debate is going to be playing out, you're more able to pivot in a way that makes you sustainable going down the line within the debate. So if I'm to crystallize this into a couple of the basic mistakes that opening speakers make when they're transitioning from 3v3, they go too narrow. They try and prove one thing within the debate, and it's a thing that, while it can be an important thing, can get framed out by later speakers. They don't expect to weigh it as appropriately as they can. Often in 3v3, you'll have one central idea, and it'll be quite clear. If we're able to prove this, we win. If they're able to prove it the other way, they win. So doing that explicit weighting about having your ideas pass forward within the debate. And then the last thing is just remembering that you are going to have those closing teams coming behind you. So trying to make sure your team case is as wide as possible without slacking on the details, because that leaves cracks for the opposition and especially your closing teams to exploit and try and fill in with their material. I think the best opening half that I have ever seen was in a round with Worlds with a team that eventually went on to win Worlds, and their opening speaker had 3 points. And the 3 points managed to cover almost every single thing that I had written down on my extension material, and covered it in a really clear way. So normally, even if they steal all my material, I'll have my red pen out. I'll be like, they didn't do this well, they didn't do this well, making sure that I have ideas for things that I could then turn into a case and try and instill my own narrative within the debate. Their second speaker got up, honed really clearly on the narrative additions that have been given by the opening, because often your first speaker can be a little bit messy, execute not perfectly. Obviously, they've had less time to think about things. The debate might not have really crystallized that point. You haven't had the chance to hear a couple of POIs and see what the broad clash rounds in, focusing really clearly on what they think the narrative is. And of course, that's something that then allows you to win the debate, because it echoes down the debate. It's something that even if the adjudicator thinks that the points you are trying to claim weren't the strongest in the debate, if you do really good actor analysis, you really explain the incentives acting on a particular person, that's often something that can have relevance even to the extensions that are brought, and so the adjudicator is more willing to credit that, and you can whip that in your points of information. So he identified very strongly what the narrative was being brought by the opening by his prime minister speaker, responded very effectively to the attacks that had come from opening opposition, making sure their analysis was still on the table, and then took an approach to broadening, picking up all of the bits in their opening speaker's speech where it was potentially slightly underanalyzed, where there's more that could be claimed within those points, and then taking those points to the limit. And so if you remember the extension workshop last week, we talked about internal and external extensions. Almost everything he did was internal, because the first speaker done such a good job giving a clear, wide, well-justified version that didn't rely on him trying to just build up everything. So just within each point, he could take it to its limit and really make sure that that was a point that could have really strong weight within the opposition's mind. And unfortunately, that team just blew, well, I don't think they blew the opening opposition out of the debate. They were also an excellent team, but both of us closing teams took third and fourth because we were unable to find any chinks in those armor, or the cracks that we could exploit and try and fill our own material. And we couldn't find anything externally to try and broaden the debate or try and find a way around those points. So it's just a wall of analysis that made sure it balanced both of those things that were appropriate. And even if we had found area, it would be quite difficult for us to explain why it was important enough to win the debate, because they also did a very clear, careful job of explaining why their material should be considered the most important. And so even if we brought up a really creative extension, difficult for it to come over what had come before us. Okay, so let's have a chat about some questions, and I'll have some hot chocolate. Okay, question. What are the key differences between a 3v3 second speaker and a deputy speaker and a BP with regards to how you frame responses? That's an excellent question. So as you, well, I hope most of you will know, a second speaker in 3v3, their job is really to extend and to shape the debate. So after the first clashes, they'll hopefully have the strategic vision to see where the debate is going to end up. They'll pivot to the material that's most important there, and then they'll add extensions or they'll add responses in a way that has a really strong, substantive, constructive addition to their case. And so you can think of this as like just a chance to do a better first speech, but that actually is mindful of what has come before, whips the stuff that is important, and makes sure that your third speaker has a good trampoline to bounce off of. So often what will happen is you're doing a little bit more of that open-ended analysis that I explained the first speaker in BP often does, because they have the second speaker there to whip them. The key difference then is that you don't have a third speaker who's on your team. In fact, your third speaker really wants to screw you over, wants to make their material the most important, wants to try and outflank you, which means that you have to do two things. Firstly, you're going to want to be adding extension-y material, but you're going to be wanting to add it in a way that boxes out your later speakers by just putting down the key bits of analysis and making sure there aren't anything that can be exploited. And you can think of this a little similarly to what you're wanting to do a second about making making those broad points, those broad adjustments that allow your third speaker to run away with it, except you need to be closing that analysis, explaining this is how far we think the point can get, here's how we get to that point. Anything else that comes farther than that is unrealistic, is implausible. We're able to achieve how much you can achieve with that point. So you are trying to be the last word within the debate on a particular issue, and you're trying to crowd out the later speakers in terms of how much that they're able to do. In terms then of just responsiveness, it's a little bit different depending on which side you are on. So obviously if you are opening government, what you are adding to the debate as a second speaker is the bulk of the responses to the case that has come from the opening government. And remember when I talked about the the narrative that's trying to be established within the debate, and how really good second speakers are able to hone in on what the narrative of their first speaker was and make sure it is seen and it is isolated and it is laid out there for the adjudicator in a way that they can very clearly engage with. I'll try and take that narrative, here's the thing that we contribute to the debate, and contrast it explicitly with what has come before. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to smash my case into the opening opposition's case as much as possible, doing the same basic responses that you would do, but making sure, once again, it's not just a hodgepodge of responses. You're also trying to make sure they're discrete, because if your closing team is listening to your responses and you give half of a response, they can finish that response for you. So you're making sure you're trying to always trying to close things off as a second speaker. So that is what you're trying to do if you are the opening government. Smash your narrative into their narrative, win that first clash, and making sure that you're offering things that close themselves and that can't be stolen by your closing team. If you are opening opposition, obviously you're responding to the smashing of the narrative into another case. So what you want to do is step back a little bit more and really think about, why have we won the opening half of this debate? So making sure that you focus in on what the narrative that is brought by your speaker, explain why the attacks haven't been particularly successful from their closing speaker, explain why your case is inherently superior, and then really have a mind to how you are going to be beating later teams within the debate. So use your responsive material, potentially not in as, you don't necessarily need to do as much. For example, if your opening speaker is just blown away their opening half and they haven't really been able to bring up that much material, your time could potentially be better strategically accepting an early POI from the opposition case. And normally closing government will be offering their extension, because now it can't be stolen, and you're going to be doing as much as you can to try and respond in a way that echoes down the debate. So once again, doing a lot of work as to identifying your narrative, explaining why the responses you give to the opening half tie into the narrative of what you're offering within the debate, and then making sure you also have that responsive mindset of, how am I going to be responding to the extension coming forward? And often when I'm speaking opening opposition second, I'll ask very explicitly, would love to hear the extension from closing government, because at that point there's no problem for them to offer it to you, and hopefully they'll at least give you a taste of what they're going to run, and then you just do your best job to explain why your narrative, the thing that you've proved within this debate, is sustainable despite that, and then offer a whole bunch of responses to it. Yeah, and also what I would add is that in BP, you need to be thinking about responses on two levels, no matter what speaker you are. You need to think about, how do I beat this point? That's the classic 3v3 technique. And then, of course, within the 3v3 technique, you have the, how important is this material? So you need to be in that weighting. That's some of that more advanced 3v3 techniques. But you need to, on the second level, have that strategic thinking of a team within a debate. Getting third is better than getting fourth. Getting second is better than getting third. Getting first is obviously like ideal. But you need to have that strategic thinking of saying, not only am I able to respond to this point, just give the basic, it's wrong for this reason, this reason, this reason, this reason, but you need to be saying, how much do you need to beat it in order to get ahead of their team? Say, for example, they've had no good substantive material, just a couple of responses to you. You can just beat those responses and move on. Don't need to spend a huge amount of time pulverizing that team into the dust. If they've had quite a weak extension. So thinking about where you want to put your responses and framing it in a, how do we beat this individual team side of analysis. Okay, how should you structure your speech as an opening half, and how is that different from 3v3? In terms of structure, it is really dependent on the debate that has happened, because that's one of the beauties of BP, is that it is a highly flexible format. You'll be debating teams from all over the world who structure their speeches in different ways. Sometimes you'll have a weak opening opposition and then very good POIs from your closing, so you're going to be wanting to push between them. It really depends also speaker by speaker. So at opening, I think the normal 3 points, here's what we bring, responses to the opposition, is a good setup, because what you want to do is just set up your team's case, make sure your ideas are put out. You can put a little bit more time proving some contextual things, some incentive analysis, as opposed to necessarily just proving concrete points. The one thing I would say about structure, though, is make sure that, especially if you are speaking second, the last person in your speech, you are closing that analysis. You have a bit at the end of each response or each point explaining what it does within the debate, why it's as far as you can go in the debate, and then how it should be assessed within the debate. So always make sure you're closing off that analysis. Sometimes you'll have 3 bits of rebuttal, one bit of extra substantive. So yeah, really depends in terms of what has happened before you, but making sure that you are mindful of the fact that you have closing teams and are structuring in a way that matches with what has come before it. When pro-amming in BP, where do you suggest speaking in opening half? That is a very good question. So it really depends what your AM wants to do. I think the position that is best to learn from when you are doing it is second, because that's the bit where you start thinking more about the strategic, how am I going to make sure that my case is closed off? How am I going to make sure that my case lasts within the debate? And you've probably got more material to respond to, because there will have been POIs. You'll have a lot more of the opposition's case as it is unfolded. So you can alternate. If you want to show someone how to do that, speak second, and then after your speech, you go through and explain, okay, this is what I did from a strategic element. This is the easy material I could have spent lots of time responding to, but I chose not to because I wanted to go in this direction. So if you want to demonstrate by example, I think second is great. And then being able to really concretely walk through your first speaker. Here's what I think you should say. Here's how you respond to those things. You've got a lot more control as a second speaker with a first speaker, making sure that they run a case that you agree with. But if your AM wants a little bit more room to fly, if they want to test their strategic understanding in a more free-flowing way, pop them at second. Set that really basic foundation for them, make sure you've understood things, and then as soon as you sit down, explain to them, okay, I've done these 5 things in my speech. I need you to close them off. I didn't make this analysis well enough. Can you fill in this gap here? I think that's where they learn best on the job, is probably speaking second, because you can't just dictate the case to them. They have to start thinking for themselves how to do particular things, and you can show things to them as you are doing it. And obviously, if you're speaking first and they're speaking second, there's a little bit more room for them to observe what you have done wrong and what you have done well from that opening. So if they are a first speaker, that is also something that they can learn from by example. What I would just say is, if you're an AM, speak in both positions as much as possible. Make sure you're getting that broad perspective, because the better you are at the position that's not your dominant position, so you're normally a first speaker or a second speaker, the more you do second, the more you understand what a first speaker needs to do to make that second speech successful. This is what distinguishes good speakers from great teammates, is making sure their speech is something that can be a springboard for their later speaker. And then you have to unlearn that when you're at second. How do you make sure that your speech is not a springboard for later speakers? How do you make sure you're closing things off and they can't be stolen by that opposition? But no, thank you. That was an excellent question. Should a second speaker on opening opposition be prioritizing extending existing material or winning existing clashes? You need to make sure that the contribution that has come from your first speaker is not in vain, because even if you are able to bring an exceptional point, many times judges will judge you by the case that has come out at first. So there's only so much you can do as a second speaker. So making sure you are whipping your existing clashes, introducing those clashes as the most important, can, even if you're losing to your other team, still snake you through on a second if you're making sure that those clashes go through. So definitely don't abandon the material that has come before you, because that is very important to how the judge has been able to do things. That said, if you have either already clearly won the opening half, and there's not much to respond to, pivoting to extending your case is definitely not something that I would advise against. And equally, if you get a point of information from a closing team that hints that there is a more important clash within the debate that neither you or your other opening team have thought about, especially if it's something that your closing team could spend a lot of time talking about, you are going to be wanting to burn as much of that material as possible. So being quite quick on your toes to extend the debate where there's an indication that there might be something else that is more important. But once again, remember that your advantage at opening is you get to say the most relevant stuff. So if you're not defending the obvious strong material that has been brought and it's unable to be fully optimized within the debate, you are wasting that advantage. Don't just bring like new extension of points for the hell of it. It all needs to be channeled through, okay, how do I impress a narrative on this debate? How do I make sure that my points, my opening the opening case stands within the debate. That's your first job. And then your second job is, okay, now how do I make it more difficult for everyone else to win this debate? By bringing out more material, which forces them to respond and engage with me, making my team more important. And also by making it much more difficult for my closing team by broadening out and making sure that they don't have material to go for. And of course, sometimes you fucked up, you've wasted your opportunity, you've run a case that in hindsight was not particularly on the most important clash, and at that stage you need to take a hard right, make sure you are doing as much within the debate to make sure that your team still has a chance of getting in the top half, even if you're not going to win because you misidentified the clash and you don't have enough time. It's good to make sure you have that material down because it makes it much more difficult for your later team to try and claim it. Neat, I have some more hot chocolate. Sorry, there's a helicopter going overhead. Okay, while people are thinking of more questions, I think a useful thing to chat about would just be the use of points of information, because obviously POIs have a slightly different strategic element to them in BP as they do in ordinary 3v3 debating. You need to be using your POIs effectively if you are an opening team in order to make sure that you remain within the debate. And this is why there's such a strong norm about closing teams. Make sure you're accepting your opening speakers, because if they're not accepting you, that reflects badly on them and their inability to allow you to engage with the points that have been brought. So at opening, like I don't even bother to offer POIs to the other opening team unless I am opening government and they have a really new second speech. So they're bringing out new ideas. They're basically a closing team at opposition deputy, and I need to try and engage with that material in order to try and win my clash. But other than that, I have another speech to engage with them. Why on earth would I be offering them POIs? Give some opportunity for your closing team to try and give away some of their cards, and hopefully that's something that you can steal it. When, though, the closing teams are speaking, there are a couple of strategic objectives you are trying to obtain within this debate. And I think there are three important ones. The first is if the opposition's case is impressive sounding, but is fundamentally flawed. You will lose debates. It'll just inevitably happen, either because they don't accept you or you're unable to think of the response or the judge just doesn't really understand the response, where someone runs a dumb case that with consistent exposure would be, in 3v3 would have been shown to be the silly case that it is. But in BP manages to snake through because a closing team hasn't been responded to properly. So what you want to do there is ask a devastating, withering POI that takes all of the wind out of their sails, knocks them out of the debate, really exposes what is the big flaw within the debate. And those are responsive POIs. Use these rarely. And the reason why I say that is often someone's case will have multiple elements. And at best, you can knock out one of those elements with a good responsive POI. But that's limited, right? There's not a huge amount you can do with that. And also, hopefully, your other closing team will be a little bit onto it and will try and knock things out. But if there is one element that is necessary for you to take it over them, and remember, if they're far ahead of you, you don't want to be attacking their case because they're going to beat you either way, even if you have a good POI. It's about what you add to the debate. If there is something that you need to do to help you take it over any of the other teams responsively, offer that in a POI. Haven't you thought about this thing, which devastates your case and makes sure that it doesn't operate? So there's the responsive POI. The second thing to say is there's the POI on engagement. And what I think this is really useful for is, remember how I talked about opening, especially the leader or the prime minister wants to be taking a broad approach where they try and prove incentives or analysis or contextual points. It's about taking the material that you have that isn't applied to something you haven't thought about. There are so many different ways that extensions can go, and then weaponizing your material against it. So that's like, how does your case, which asserts this, deal with the analysis we gave you at first about the incentives operating on the Chinese Communist Party to do X, Y, and Z. That is the ideal point of information because it takes something that was in your case implicitly, because you've taken that broad approach, you made sure you didn't get tunnel vision within the debate, something new comes out that you didn't expect, but you're still able to force engagement with the other team. That's really good because it forces a back and forth between your ideas and their ideas, which means both of you are boosted in the judge's mind. So that's the engagement point of information. The last thing is the, but what about my material point of information? And that's not necessarily we're trying to force engagement. Say you've been trying to prove one thing that just isn't at all relevant to the extension that's come out at a closing team. What you try and do there is try and weight your analysis or force them to explicitly weigh their or impact their analysis against your analysis in a way that'll helpfully expose to the judges why two cases, which seem equally well explained, shouldn't be considered an equal contribution to the debate. And note, you have an advantage of this as the opening team because you've been able to pick the most important material, the stuff that on the list was like your closing team barely even thought about. They're like, oh, this is so obvious. Why should we even be like wasting time trying to think about it as an extension? You have that material in your case. And so you should be explicitly, when you are setting up your debate, when you are going through your speeches, explaining why it's the most important, and then using that analysis to say, hey, why isn't our point more important than your point? How can you win if you aren't able to prove X, Y, and Z? And that's like, please look at me, my points are great, please respond to them. Analysis, don't just stand up and say, please respond to our point about this. Always frame it through weighting, explain, even if you are able to prove your case, why is it more important than what we have proven to you? That either forces them to explain why your case is wrong, which once again forces them to try and deal with it, or to try and explain why their case is less important or more important with you, which once again has to buy into your framing of the debate and how you've set things up. So that's really what you want to achieve with that final type of POI. So the key response POI, the implicit analysis, the engaging POI, and then the, but what about our case POI? Why is your case better than our case in this particular way POI? Okay, another question. And if there are no more questions after I answer this, we'll sign off. What I would say is there's club night after this for the University of Auckland. I will be judging, which will be very exciting, but so will many other highly talented and beautiful debaters. So go onto the University of Auckland Facebook page and you will be able to find the forum to sign up. It's all on Zoom. It's incredibly easy. Anyone is welcome no matter where they are in the world, so please come along. Okay, so question. Are there any good videos on YouTube or in the internet of good examples of an opening half? Why, yes, there are many excellent examples. So what I think is a wonderful, like the debate that I often show to people when I'm trying to impress on them, the different things that teams can do well within the debate, I go back to the De La Salle, which is in the Philippines, World's Final on This House Supports Nationalism. And that was won by the opening government side. And what you'll see there is they had a key idea that they wanted to prove, a narrative that they were going to add to the debate. The other teams were all exceptional. They flashed and they brought excellent new analysis and they clashed in really interesting ways on different diagonals and different directions. But that what had been done really well by opening government is just setting up the debate really cleanly and clearly, proving the things they wanted to prove, making sure that that stuff was wide enough to be relevant within the debate and being able to go through it. So if you look up, I'm not sure exactly what you need to Google to find it, but De La Salle, WUDC, or Worlds, Grand Final, Open Final, This House Supports Nationalism, you will find an excellent debate that will hopefully be very useful to you in figuring out what the different positions do within the debate and why each of them are very good. I particularly like the closing opposition in that debate. I think our friends from the University of Sydney deserved to win that Worlds Final, but that is just me. And it was an opinion not shared by the majority of judges. So, but I would encourage you to check it out because it is also for me the platonic ideal of what an extension does. It was consistent with what their opening team had brought, but flipped the debate in a new way that was just excellent to listen to. My young mind was just blown. Okay, any other questions? Oh, amazing. It has been supplied in the comments. This is exactly the type of crowdsourcing that we want to see. This is a great debate. I'd encourage you to watch it. It's just very good. I'll just sit here for a while. It's a beautiful evening. I might judge out here. I really like judging outside. I messed it. Good luck to all of the New Zealand schools debaters, whether or not they're watching, who are involved in the in nationals this weekend. Like, it really sucks that it was the in-person aspect was cancelled, but I hope you'll smash it. Make sure that you chat to the other team around the debates. Make sure that you try and extract the most value from it. And then in your university debating careers, you'll be like, oh my God, I faced you on Zoom in round 2 of the famous 2020 nationals. Yeah. Good luck. Do your best. I still have speakers from my nationals, my first nationals when I was in year 12, who lord their round 6 win over me. Outrageous. It was an outrageous call. It was just so wrong. Outstanding. I believe unless there's any last dash questions, that is the end. Go to the University of Auckland's page, give us a like, and come to Clubs Night tonight. As a judge, as a speaker, the form will be on there. The Zoom joining instructions will be there. So come on.